Hey everyone, here is how to make this almond stitch scarf. It's fairly beginner friendly because it's basically just a long rectangle, but the stitch pattern is the most complicated part. Once you've got that down, it should be simple from there. You can make this in any length and any width that you want, and the pattern will still work. For this scarf, I used about 300 grams of chunky yarn, which was 3 balls for me, a 10mm hook, darning needle, scissors, and a measuring tape. Okay, so to start, I'm going to grab the tail of my ball. I'm going to make a slip knot, grab my hook, and I'm going to make a chain. You'll need this chain to be as long as you want your scarf to be. So this is the length that's going to wrap all the way around your neck, depending on if you want a really long scarf or if you want a shorter scarf, or if you want to make it into an infinity scarf. That'll depend on how long you make this chain. This is how long I've made my chain if you want to make the same as me, but the length of the chain won't affect the pattern as long as it's a multiple of 3. So just make sure that whatever number of chains you end up with, it's divisible by 3, just for the stitch pattern. So I've got my chain here now and it's divisible by 3. So now what we're going to need to do is you're going to need to block off that last chain just so you know which chain you need to go into, and you're going to chain up 2. So 1, 2, and we're going to do a half double crochet into that third chain from the hook, so the one that I was holding just there. For that, I'm going to go into the back loop of the chain. You don't have to do that if you don't want to. The little V here at the front would be the front of the loop, and if you roll it over, there's another bump on the back. So I'm going to go into all of those back loops, but if you want to go into the front, that's totally fine. It just looks a bit cleaner going in through the back. So I'm going to turn it over, and into that third chain, I'm going to do a half double. So yarn over, insert into the chain, yarn over, pull through, and now I'm going to yarn over and pull through all 3 of the loops on the hook. So into that next chain along, I'm going to yarn over, insert, yarn over, pull through. Now I'm going to yarn over, pull through all 3 loops. I'm going to do one more half double crochet. So yarn over into that next loop and finish the half double crochet. Now for the next 3 stitches, I'm going to do a slip stitch. So for that, you're just going to insert straight in, yarn over, pull through, and now you're going to pull the first loop through the second loop. So into that next stitch, yarn over, pull through, and pull the first loop through the second. And one more time. And now we're up to half double crochets. So back to half doubles, I'm going to put 1 half double crochet into the next 3 stitches, and then after that I'm going to do slip stitches, and you're just going to need to repeat this going all the way down. So 3 half double crochets and 3 slip stitches. When you get to the end, join back in and I'll show you the next row. This pattern is the almond stitch pattern and it's a 4-row repeat. So the next 2 rows will be matching, and then the 2 rows after that will be doing the alternate to give that wavy almond pattern. So join back in when you get to the end. I'm up to my last 3 half double crochets. And it doesn't matter if you ended on the slip stitch. Whichever stitch you end on is completely fine, and it will work for the pattern. If you got to the end and say you only had 2 chains left, but you had 3 stitches to do to complete your pattern, you have 2 options. One would be to just stick with 2 instead of having 3 stitches in that specific stitch. You could just have 2, and then when you turn around and go back the other way, you just do 2 instead of 3. You just do 1 where there is 1 from the previous row. Or you could do an increase. If you ended up with 1 extra stitch, you could do the same thing. You could have 1 extra stitch, so 4 of the half double crochets, for example, instead of 3, and then just continue doing that the rest of the way down. Or you can do a decrease. The same thing's going to go if you come along here and you realize that you have done, say, 2 slip stitches up here when you're meant to do 3. You can do the same thing. You can either continue along with 2, or you can do an increase to bring it up to the correct number. If you've made a scarf as long as mine and you realize that you've made a mistake, you might not want to undo the whole thing. So I would probably be doing a increase or decrease in that case. But if you've done a short scarf, then it might be fine to just undo and go back and make sure that the count is right. The first row is always the hardest and most confusing because you actually have to count, whereas now we're just going to be putting the same stitch into the stitch of the previous row, so you still have to pay attention, but you don't have to count as much. So hopefully it gets a bit easier from here. Once you get the hang of this stitch pattern, it'll get even easier. So now for the second row, we're going to be doing the exact same stitch that we did in the previous stitch into that stitch. So every even numbered row is going to be doing the same stitch. So that's chain up 2, because I'm going to be doing a half double into my half doubles.
But if you ended on a slip stitch, then you would just chain up 1, and when you turn around you would start with slip stitches instead of half double crochets like I'm about to do.
So turn around and I'm going to go into the back loop. So these 2 little V's here are the loops. The back one is the furthest one away from your body if you're right-handed. So I'm going to go into that back loop and do a half double crochet. And then I'm going to go into the next 2 back loops and do 1 half double in each, because I'm copying what we did in the previous row. Okay, and now I'm up to the slip stitches. So I'm going to put 1 slip stitch into the back loop of those next 3 stitches. So just copying what you did from that previous row. 3 slip stitches, and now back to 3 half double crochets into those half double crochets. You're just going to continue that all the way down. When you get to the end, I'll show you the next row, because this is a 4 row repeat. We will be halfway through the pattern when we get to the end of this row. And then after that, you're just going to continue along with the pattern until your scarf is as wide as you want it to be. And that's all that there is to this pattern. Once you get the stitches down, it is super easy and it looks so effective. Okay, so I've made it up to the end of that row. And now we're up to row 3, and row 3 is going to be to do the opposite stitch of what's in the previous row, because it's an odd numbered row. So all of the odd numbered rows going forward will be to do the opposite stitch of what's in the stitch before, and all the even numbered rows will be to do the same stitch. So for 1, kind of doesn't count because it's the first row. Then the second row, we were doing half double crochets into the half double crochets. So now for the odd row, for row 3, we're going to do slip stitches into the half double crochets and half double crochets into the slip stitches. So I'm starting off with the slip stitch because I have a half double crochet as my last stitch. So I'm going to chain up 1.
If you did a slip stitch as your last stitch in that previous row, then you would be chaining up 2 and continue with half double crochets rather than slip stitches like I'm about to do.
Turn around, and I'm going to put 3 back loop slip stitches into those first 3 stitches. So now the next stitches along from that previous row were slip stitches, so I'm going to do half double crochets. Okay, and now back onto the next 3, I'm going to do slip stitches again, and you're just going to repeat this pattern all the way down. When you get to the end, we're going to turn around and we're going to do another row, putting the same stitch into the stitch of the previous row, because it'll be row 4, an even numbered row. So basically when we get up to this end, we'll be putting slip stitches into the slip stitches to finish it off. I will show you the 4th and final row of our repeat at the other end if you want to see it. Otherwise, you can just go ahead until your scarf is as wide as you want it to be, making sure that every odd numbered row is doing the opposite stitch from the previous row, and every even numbered row is doing the same stitch as the previous row. So I'm almost at the end of my 3rd row. So now going on to the 4th row, because it's an even numbered row, we're going to do the same stitch that we just did in the previous row into that stitch. So I just did slip stitches, which means that I'm going to do slip stitches at the start of the next row. So I'm going to chain up 1.
If your last stitch was a half double crochet, then you would chain up 2 and continue with half double crochets as your first lot of stitches for the next row, rather than slip stitches like I'm about to do.
Turn around, and I'm going to put 3 back loop slip stitches into those next 3 stitches. And then the next 3 stitches along from the previous row are the half double crochets, so I'll be putting half double crochets into those stitches. And you're just going to continue all the way down following this pattern, and then keep going until you make your scarf as wide as you want it to be, making sure that for the odd numbered rows, you're putting the opposite stitch into the stitch of the previous row. And for the even numbered rows, you're putting the same stitch that you did in the previous row. So keep going until you have made your scarf as wide as you want it to be.
This is the row count and centimetre and inch measurements for the scarf that I made, if you want to make it the same width as me.
So once you've done as many rows as you want to do to make it as wide as you want it to be, should be looking a little something like this, and the other side looks more bobbly but straight lines. So whichever side you prefer, you know, you can switch it around with one being the front and one being the back. I basically just kept going until I'd finished up 3 balls that I had of this yarn. And there was a little bit extra on here, but I cut that off because it wasn't enough to do one whole extra row. But you could make it wider or narrower. That's not going to affect the pattern. There's no trim. It's just going to be these straight rows. So I just have my last 2 stitches to do, which are both half double crochets. So I'm just going to do those. And then to fasten off, I'm just going to do a chain of 1. And then cut off your end and pull the tail through. Now I'm going to grab a darning needle, insert that into the end of my needle, and I'm just going to weave in the end, trying to make it not too visible. So I'm just going to go through some of these stitches under here and pull it through. So if you've also got joins where you join on new balls of yarn, you can also weave in those ends so they're not noticeable as well. And then that'll be it for the scarf. It's a pretty easy pattern, but I think that the almond stitch just makes it look so effective. It makes it look like it's harder than it is. And for basically making a giant rectangle, I think it's not too bad. So there we go.
And now you'll just need to do the same thing and weave in any other ends that you have, and then we're done with our scarf. I hope you found this video useful, and if you have any questions, please leave them below and I will try to get back to you. If you like this video, consider hitting the like and the subscribe button, and all my other social media is listed in the description box.